Hi everyone. Thank you for joining me again. This is Elizabeth Voss. I am editor-in-chief at Disobedient Media, and I'm really grateful that you're tuning in once again to hear me rant. This stream is going to be very different to what I usually do. I usually read my articles simply because I want to make Disobedient Media articles available to as many people as possible in different formats, because I know that some people don't have the time to read sometimes very lengthy stories. So with that said, some news happened in the last 24 hours or so. It came out, an amazing story came out by doctors who had treated Julian, or had seen Julian Assange, and who had determined that he does not have adequate access to healthcare. And usually what I would do as a journalist is I would comment on this, write about it, and publish it with Disobedient Media, and then stream about it if I thought that was necessary. The reason I'm doing things differently tonight as a one-off, and I won't do this again, I don't think, but the reason that I wanted to do a different format of a stream this evening is because I think that all I want to do is get people to read that article that the doctors in question wrote. I want people to go, as many people as possible, to go read what they had to say, because that's what's important, not me, not my opinions about it, just their words. And so instead of reading my article, I'm going to read you theirs. And another preface before I begin to read that to you is that some people, including my really good friend Susie Dawson, have taken issue with The Guardian and their placement of a totally anti-Assange smear piece that is advertised next to this article. And for that reason only, I won't share screen with you as I read. I'm just going to read it to you because I think, regardless of The Guardian's anti-Assange and, the issues with The Guardian, I feel like what the doctors in this story had to say is extremely important. And I'm going to get to that in 1 second. I just want to tell you the names of these doctors, and if anybody hasn't got onto this yet, I'm going to say it once again. When I read this article, it's not my article. It's not anything to do with Disobedient Media. I just think it's important. So, the authors of this were Sean Love, who is an MD, and Dr. Brock Chisholm, and I'm probably murdering these names, I'm sorry, but who is a clinical psychologist, and Sondra Crosby. And all of these doctors saw Assange, and their article is seriously worth reading, and I've linked it in the description of this video, and I'm just going to read it to you right now, and then I'm going to add a couple of thoughts, and that's going to be the end of this stream. So, the article is titled, quote, "We examined Julian Assange, and he badly needs care, but he can't get it." And then the beginning of the article reads, "The WikiLeaks founder has a human right to health care. It will not be met while he remains confined in the Ecuadorian embassy." And then it goes on to say, "Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, has not stepped outside the heavily surveilled confines of the Ecuadorian embassy in London since he entered the building almost 6 years ago. Naturally, much of the media attention has focused on his international legal drama and threats to his safety, including arrest and possible extradition to the US. In contrast, ongoing violations of his human rights, including his fundamental right to health care in the context of his unusual confinement, have received less coverage. As clinicians with a combined experience of 4 decades caring for and about refugees and other traumatized populations, we recently spent 20 hours over 3 days performing a comprehensive physical and psychological evaluation of Mr. Assange. While the results of the evaluation are protected by doctor-patient confidentiality, it is our professional opinion that his continued confinement is dangerous physically and mentally to him and a clear infringement of his human right to health care. Packing a stethoscope and blood pressure cuff, and after being conspicuously photographed entering the embassy, we performed our examinations in a poorly ventilated conference room. The reason for examining Mr. Assange in these conditions is that he has no access to proper medical facilities. Although it is possible for clinicians to visit him in the embassy, most doctors are reluctant to do so. Even for those who will see him, their capacity to provide care is limited. At the embassy, there are none of the diagnostic tests, treatments, and procedures that we have concluded he needs urgently. As clinicians, it is our ethical duty to advocate for the health and human rights of all people as promised under international law and to call on our colleagues to hold our professional societies, institutions, and governments accountable. In 2012, Ecuador, in accordance with its right as a sovereign state, formally determined that Mr. Assange meets the requirements enshrined by the 1951 Convention and 1967 Protocol relating to the status of refugees. Regardless of the allegations against Mr. Assange, he remains a citizen of Australia and a refugee, and as The Guardian reported last week, he is also now a citizen of Ecuador. Side note, he's also been declared a diplomat by Ecuador, and now returning to the article. In 2016, the UN Human Rights Council Working Group on Arbitrary Detention found that Mr. Assange's situation within the Ecuadorian embassy had become a state of arbitrary deprivation of liberty. It is the opinion of the working group that the embassy is not equipped, excuse me, my voice is breaking, that the embassy is not equipped for prolonged detention and lacks the necessary medical equipment or facilities to provide a reasonable environment for Mr. Assange, a determination with which we concur. Experience tells us that the prolonged uncertainty of indefinite detention inflicts profound psychological and physical trauma above and beyond the expected stressors of incarceration. These can include severe anxiety, pathological levels of stress, dissociation, depression, suicidal thoughts, post-traumatic stress disorder, and chronic pain, among others. Mr. Assange is surrounded by credible personal threats from various governments and individuals. He is also unable to avail himself of his right to access medical institutions due to the threat of imminent arrest should he step outside the embassy, even for a medical emergency. It is unconscionable that Mr. Assange is in the position of having to decide between avoiding arrest and potentially suffering the health consequences, including death, of a life-threatening crisis such as a heart attack, if a life-threatening crisis such as a heart attack were to occur. Further, our assessment reveals that he has had no access to sunlight, appropriate ventilation, or outside space for over 5.5 years. This has taken a considerable toll. It is our professional opinion that Mr. Assange's physical and psychological circumstances at the embassy are in violation of the spirit of the UN standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. We must ask, why does Mr. Assange remain unable to exercise his human right to health services? Are states allowed to choose who is entitled to his fundamental right and who is not, to this fundamental right and who is not? We call on the British Medical Association and colleagues in the UK to demand safe access to medical care for Mr. Assange and to oppose openly the ongoing violation of his human right to healthcare. As tensions between the UK and Ecuador escalate over Mr. Assange's unsustainable situation, the international press has now reported new efforts to resolve the situation diplomatically through a mediator. Any such discussions must include a fair and transparent discussion of his access to healthcare. It is, we believe, the only correct and ethical course of action, and we champion the few clinicians who have sought to care for Mr. Assange in these difficult circumstances. And at the end, it mentions that this is by Sandra S. Crosby, Brock Chisholm, and Sean Love, who are the doctors. And the opinions expressed in the article are solely the authors and do not reflect those of their employers. And that is the end of the article. And again, the reason that I want to bring this up is to encourage people to read that and to understand what they're saying, and it's hugely important. And also because just yesterday I published an op-ed on the fact that that independent media must step up where legacy press will not, and actively work to support WikiLeaks and Assange, because it would be disastrous not to. As a side note to the whole issue with Assange's health, the other reason that this is an important stream for me to do, which I won't do these types of streams again, as I've said like 5 times now, is because WikiLeaks and the documents in WikiLeaks are invaluable to independent media. Independent media relies on the content of WikiLeaks for stories across the board. There are stories, obviously, that have nothing to do with WikiLeaks, the organization, that cite their material. I've cited WikiLeaks in my articles on completely, divergent topics, from Yemen and their Yemen files to Ed Rendell and Haiti to, just hundreds of articles that we've published as Disobedient Media that has cited them. And I know that a lot of other independent media outlets also cite WikiLeaks content. And if we didn't have access to that type of information, there would be no leg to stand on for independent media. We could throw pot shots at the establishment, but we wouldn't have the evidence to back what we're saying. And to ignore the plight of the organization or the person that's leading it, it is ridiculous. And so independent media has to step up and to call out these injustices as they happen. And the same appreciation for primary source material and how important it is when it's these hugely diverse topics. It's the same impetus that led Susie Dawson to start her Decipher You initiative, which I've been lucky enough to participate with her in. She's done an amazing job looking through the Snowden files, and I have participated with her in looking through those files for unreported stories that are important and significant. And in the same way, WikiLeaks is a huge resource for journalists, for legitimate journalists and independent news pundits, comedians, everyone. And so regardless of any politics with Assange, WikiLeaks is important, and if you can't support that, then you have no interest in anti-establishment efforts. So that's the end of my rant. I just wanted to point this out because of everything that I've talked about. I won't do a stream like this again in the near future. I would prefer to just keep it to Disobedient Media stories because I don't like ranting off the cuff. I like having the framework of our stories to talk to you about. So, I hope that you share this around. Please, even if you don't like this video, please share that article or other articles about this subject with all of your social network, because I think it's extremely important right now. Even people that are not part of the independent media sphere, just retweeting on your phone is a huge, huge step in the fight against censorship, and it is a really powerful thing to do. Sharing an important story, sharing it on Facebook, on Twitter, Reddit, wherever you hang out, that does do something. You are the ground troops against censorship, and without you, the establishment wins. So, apologies if this rant was long-winded and ridiculous, but I just really felt it needed to be said. And with that said, I will now stream a couple of Disobedient Media stories. And before I end this stream, I'd just like to add that I am, as always, aware that the stream is choppy and that it's not syncing up with the audio. I am working to amend that. It will probably be a few days before I get the correct configuration sorted out. And in the meantime, I'm just going to hold off on streaming after this evening so that I can just come back at you with properly working videos. And so I appreciate everyone who's shown support so far in what I've been doing on this stream. It's been amazing. I didn't expect it. I just wanted to make it available for people on audio, and they seem to really like it. So thank you everyone who has supported me. And with that, I'm going to call it a night on this stream. Thank you.